Hi folks, Tony here. I'm just doing another one of my live video readings. Apologies for being a little bit beardy. Normally before these things I try and just make an effort, you know, I don't always make an effort, but I at least shave and I shower, and today I just couldn't be buggered. So because it's 2 o'clock in the morning, I quite often remember that I've got to do this about 1:30 in the morning and go, oh crap. It's normally around the time that Rue's saying, it's about time to go to bed. And then I sort of say, yeah, but you know, there's something nagging away in the back of my mind that we've got to do today. And then we sort of go, ah! And so today was one of those days, hence the lack of shaving. But I'm sure you can put up, yes, Rue's very fond of my pirate look.
Arr.
Arr.
You were doing rum as well.
That's my, yeah.
The weather's a bit...
Anyway, yes, the other thing is that it's got terrible storms here at the moment going on in Perth. So if we cut out, if the quality of the connection is really, really bad, it is just, I'm sorry, our internet isn't terribly good anyway.
And if you get struck by
big
lightning...
storms. And yes, I have plugged in a surge protector because I didn't have a surge protector on all my computers and equipment, which, given that they are literally my livelihood and everything, and the most expensive thing I own, was a bit silly. And I finally felt rich enough to splash out for a decent quality surge protector, and then had it for about 2 weeks and through one of the worst thunderstorms we've ever had without plugging it in, because I've got to turn my computer off to do that, and turning my computer off is incredibly difficult and long-winded because I have a Mac and I just leave it on all day and all night, and I've normally got about 20 different projects on the go. So it was a lot of effort to actually turn it off. Anyway, today I've turned it off, plugged in my surge protector, so the storm can do its worst.
Oh, happy birthday to Rachel Vincent. It's her birthday.
Oh, happy birthday, Rachel Vincent. Hey! I would sing happy birthday to you, but that would traumatise you. Like, really, seriously, nobody wants that. I'll get on and read. Oh, I'll just say, by the way, I'm wearing these delightful... we call them monster pants that Rue made. Oh, there, I'm destroying our carefully prepared office. Look, so yes, Rue's been doing lots of arts and crafts this weekend, and she's dug out and repaired her first ever crafting project that she made. Our lovely baggy winter monster pants. Yeah. Mine have got robots and dinosaurs on instead of monsters, but
ain't nobody got time.
Yeah. He's counting. Okay then, I've got a couple of chapters that I wanted to read to you today. They're a little bit, they're eclectic, because I've just picked a load of different ones from throughout the book, because this is my third week of reading from Kamikaze Kangaroos, and there's a couple of really big dramatic things that happen later on in the book. We do a great big walk that you may or may not remember, called the Blood Track, and then we go to New Zealand, so I wanted to feature some of those stories, so next week I can get into some of those. So I'm just sort of picking, not at random, picking a few here and there throughout the book for this one. So I got some that I think are quite interesting, but unfortunately Rue has vetoed any of the stories about like our relationship significant moments. Yeah, she's banned me from mentioning sex.
Yes,
so
I have.
If poor girl, she's you know not bad enough for her that she had to read it and then edit it and then put up with it when her dad read it, and of course all her sisters and my family, and now lots and lots of strangers all over the world. Hooray!
We're not discussing the showers.
Definite downsides of having a travel writer or a memoir writer for a husband. So if at any point I haven't read through all these chapters that I'm going to do now, so if I stop and look awkward and then skip a bit, it's probably because
censored.
I'm censoring on the fly.
What can you do?
Yes, quite. Okay, right, guys, I'm gonna get straight into it. So, amongst the many things we did while we travelled around Australia is we had to work a lot of times. So this is just about one of our random jobs which we had, I think up in Kununurra this one was. So I'll start reading that, and then I'll stop in between each chapter and give you a little bit of explanation about what's going on, because instead of reading straight through, I'm gonna skip from interesting event to interesting event. We don't want the boring crap. Okay, here we go. Field day. When we heard on the grapevine about a chance to switch jobs, we dropped those pumpkins like hot potatoes. Our new job was on a sandalwood plantation, further away on the outskirts of town. We treated ourselves to a couple of days off, celebrating the end of 2 full weeks of work in the pumpkin fields. How it lasted that long, I do not know. My back still hasn't forgiven me. On the first morning of our new job, we were presented with a worryingly familiar scenario. Dawn found us sitting in a rapidly disintegrating minibus, bouncing along a knackered dirt track towards a plantation. The vehicle was in roughly the same state of repair as the road. There were holes in the roof, there were holes in the floor. It needed to be push-started every time and was stopped by natural braking, i.e. coasting until it either ran out of speed or hit something, or both. 7 other workers were crammed into the torn vinyl-covered seats along with Rue, Jill and myself, and every one of us was braced in position with arms and legs and in a few cases heads pressed against what was left of the dented metal roof. "She'll be right," the boss had said in true Aussie fashion when I'd commented to him that only the paint job was holding his van together, after which he'd introduced himself as Jono. Jono loved to drive that wreck of a van. He loved to drive it at speed. He prided himself on knowing exactly how to coax what he wanted from the ancient engine. He deftly slotted it in between openings in the fence and shot across makeshift bridges over a network of irrigation ditches. He was grinning at me in the rearview mirror as if to say, "See?" When suddenly the world turned upside down, and the seat in front of me took a swipe at my ribs. I twisted as I fell and ended up lying on my face across the mud-encrusted windows. Rue was lying on top of me, and at least 3 people were lying on top of her. The van was on its side, nose down in a ditch, and I was slowly being suffocated. This must be what it's like to play the Aussies at rugby, I thought. "I can get out the window," someone called from the front. "Yeah, me too." And one by one we squeezed out of whatever opening presented itself. After all, there were plenty of them. And Jono stood on the bank, counting heads as we crawled up to him. "Sorry, lads," he said cheerily, ignoring the presence of several women. "It gets a bit narrow there." Apparently this satisfied him that the situation was back under control. He pulled out his cell phone, took a deep breath before punching a number in. "Hey there, big man. Yeah, we've had a bit of a crash." He held the phone away from his ear for a few seconds while the swearing on the other end subsided. His mood deteriorated as the noise continued. "Yeah, that no part, by the ditch. Yeah, in the ditch, upside down." There was a final blast of abuse from the speaker. "Yeah," he agreed glumly, "again." The voice did not sound impressed. Luckily for us, the crash site wasn't far from the job site. Jono, eager to get back in the good books, led us straight into the field and got us started. Weeding would be an accurate description of the job that ensued. Not that I was exactly sure what we were weeding and why, but the contrast with our last job picking pumpkins was unbelievable. It was just so easy. After 2 weeks of straining, back-breaking toil hefting gigantic pumpkins into the back of a tractor that moved along at jogging pace, this wasn't even work at all. I strolled over to Rue, who was busy pulling a small leafy plant from the soil. "This is incredible," I commented. "I know, shh." She was obviously thinking the same thing. Don't rock the boat. We had to keep this job at all costs. Another lazy hour drifted by. I wandered up another furrow, pulling up whatever came closest to hand. There was a certain dark green, very persistent weed that seemed to be everywhere. "Check this out." I dropped a handful of the plants in front of Rue. "These damn things are in every row." "That's because they're the support plants," she hissed. "Don't pull them out, okay? We'll get in trouble." "Oh, really? Shit, sorry." She herself was leaving a trail of remarkably similar looking plants uprooted. "What's the difference?" She sighed. She always had to help me with stuff like this. I was never a particularly observant person. "These are weeds." I took the proffered plant and studied it. "This is the support tree." The fingers of her free hand gently lifted the leaves atop the stalk nearest to her. To me, they looked identical. "See?" "Of course," I lied. "Good. And what about this one? I held up another of my recent victims. We pull these out too, right? That's the sandalwood tree. Oh, now I get it. In spite of herself, Rue was starting to giggle. How many of those have you ripped up? Well, all of them, I think. She burst out laughing, but caught herself, with effort, after one guffaw. Shit, she coughed out between suppressed giggles. Don't pick any more. It was all I could do not to crack up myself. We were halfway through the day, and I must have divested about a quarter of the field of its primary raison d'etre. We picked on in silence for the next half hour. Whoa, careful there! It was Jono, stomping up the furrow behind me. Don't be pulling that one out, mate! I froze mid-motion. That there's a sandalwood. Just looks different because it ain't grown as much, he explained. I released my grip on the immature specimen. Whew, glad I stopped you there. And he strode past me towards the next keen plucker. I stopped for a few seconds and mopped sweat from my forehead with a bandana. So, those ones too, eh? This job is harder than I thought. As Jono drove us home in the recently de-ditched minibus, I couldn't resist asking, is this job real? There has to be some cash. Like, deep underground you've got some super secret weapons lab and we're just here to make you look innocent on the satellite photos. And you pay us $18 an hour to pick weeds so no one rocks a boat, right? Ha! Nah, not quite that exciting, he replied. See, these sandalwood trees will be producing oil in a couple of years, and that oil's expensive stuff. Some trees will make loads, some not as much, but when they mature, they'll be worth between $3,000 and $15,000 each. There was a stunned silence. I couldn't have spoken, even if I'd wanted to. My throat had suddenly gone dry. 15,000, I finally croaked. Jeez, one of the other workers exclaimed. That's crazy, man. What if someone steals one? Security. The whole place is fenced all around. Got CCTV cameras on all the fence posts and our own fire station on site in case of a bushfire gets too close. Yeah, that field you're working on today is worth something like $85 million. They go all out to protect these babies. I felt vaguely sick, whilst at the same time I had the hideous feeling that deep inside me was welling up a great big belly laugh. I'd worked here for one day. By my rough estimate, I'd done at least $1 million worth of damage. Rue was nudging me with her foot. I glanced over at her. Her expression was unmistakable. Say nothing. I was inclined to agree. Back at the campsite that evening, we discussed our options. Well, more accurately, Jill and Rue discussed them while I fell around the place laughing. It'll take up a long time to get it out of my salary. Come on, seriously, Rue chastised me. What are we going to do? I took a few deep breaths to calm myself and sat on the grass next to her. If we don't go back, it'll look really suspicious, I pointed out. On the other hand, if we do go back and they spot my little mistake, it's quite possible they'll drown us in a ditch. Or they could just put us in a car with Jono driving, Rue added. So what do you reckon? Should we look for new jobs again? With a theatrical sigh, Rue reached from her mobile phone. I put Jono's number in here. I'll send him a text. I watched over her shoulder as she typed. From Tony, Jill and Rue. Thanks for an amazing experience. Which I thought was quite generous. She paused for a moment, then shrugged. Not much else to put, she said, and added, we quit.
Oh, mate. Yeah, why did they get you to do gardening?
Don't know. It was a cracking one. I always remember that one because I actually wrote about that in. It was the Pumpkins, wasn't it? I wrote about that, and it was. I was writing the manuscript for that Bear in My Pants, but I hadn't got anywhere near done. It was just a load of random stories on this knackered little laptop. But I did manage to bash out one story because, as always, we were broke and Rue was reading these trashy magazines and they had a true love real life story section in it, and you could win was it $200 or something? Was it $100? I don't know.
Yeah.
It was
$250.
$250.
Yay,
Wow, I should do another one.
Money.
$250. So I wrote the story of us getting together whilst working for the Pumpkins, and it was extremely cheesy, and it was my first published work, and I got $250 for it. It was absolutely hilariously bad and agonisingly embarrassing, and Rue's twin sister Sonia found it and read it out at my wedding.
Yes,
delightful. Didn't see that one coming. Okay, so this next chapter, a little bit further, we're no longer working, we're back on the road. in Rusty, what's left of him. And this one's called Dressed to Kill. Our first major stop was Alice Springs. This is because at 1,052 miles from Kununura, Alice Springs is the first major stop. Actually, it's the first stop bigger than a petrol station. We had a couple of plans while we were in town. The first was to eat as much junk food as possible because we'd been cooking for 4 on our tiny gas stove for the last few nights and instant noodles were starting to lose their appeal. The second, which was far more exciting, was to buy ball gowns. Now, there is a reason for this, honest. I'm just not going to tell you yet. So after we finished eating our McDonald's, I had my first experience with the Aussie phenomenon of op shops. Op shops are rather like charity shops in the UK or Goodwill stores in the US, but unlike most countries I've visited, here people actually donate things you'd consider wearing. I know, hard to believe, but there it is. I must have traipsed in and out of hundreds of charity shops in the UK, and the most exciting thing I ever bought was a dog-eared copy of 1984, which was crap. But instead of a cramped little shop with racks of ankle-length pleated skirts and size 18 maternity dresses, here the op shops were big, popular, cheap and well stocked with genuinely interesting items. So it was with considerable excitement that I headed for the size 18 maternity dresses rack. The trouble with being a bloke, and a well-built one at that, is they just don't make skimpy outfits to fit me. In the end, I settled on a delightful pink number with a scooped neckline. Originally knee-length, it ended halfway down my thighs. Not many women reach 6 feet tall, and those that do probably have the same trouble finding a nice dress as I do. Sonia, Sir Rue's twin sister, Rue and Jill had a much easier time, taking their pick of the fancy things on offer and settling for a trio of bridesmaid dresses in assorted colours. They were delighted to discover that their dresses were less than $10 a piece, but not nearly as happy as I was when I found out that I am in fact only a size 16. Does my bum look big in this? I asked Rue. It looks fucking gigantic, Jill chipped in. And yet weirdly appealing, Rue said. Oi, stop that, Sonia was adamant. We'll have no fondling in the dresses. This picture is messed up enough as it is. And you know what? She was right. The lady at the till offered me a matching pink handbag, and I discovered a delicate straw hat that set off my eyes. I figured I needed the extra bits and pieces if I was going to be convincing. The others dissuaded me from wearing my outfit back to the car, though, for some reason. And then we were off, headed into Kings Canyon, where, amongst other things, the movie Priscilla, Queen of the Desert was filmed. Now, I hadn't seen this film. Apparently, it featured a bunch of transvestites driving a bus through the Australian outback, and according to the girls, it paralleled our trip in some way I couldn't quite grasp. Because, as far as I knew, none of us were transvestites. Well, apart from me. 3 girls hiking around a rocky canyon in ball gowns as a tribute to their favourite movie, that at least was understandable, if not exactly commonplace. Only I would be doing it in drag, and I didn't even have a clue what the film was about. But it sounded like a damn good idea, so I rolled with it. We dressed ourselves beside Rusty, applying our makeup over copious amounts of sunscreen, which I'm told, in my case at least, added a certain Hammer horror quality to the finished effect. But no one could deny we looked fabulous in our colourful, flowing gowns. Darling. Sonia set up her video camera, filming a group of avid hikers as they started up the first incline. As each one passed us, we were treated to a series of surreptitious glances. Guaranteed, every single one of them was thinking, what the fuck? But no one was actually going to say that to us. Or anything else for that matter. After all, something as simple as hello could result in them being trapped in conversation with a dangerous bunch of lunatics. I had to ask myself what I'd have done in their place. Would I, in all honesty, have walked up to a bloke wearing a ball gown in the middle of rocky no man's land and started chatting? Probably not. People get murdered that way. To show the hikers I sympathised with their dilemma, I batted my eyelashes at them as they walked past. They hiked faster than most people jog after that, showing commendable enthusiasm given they had a 3-hour trek ahead of them. Once the column had passed, we swaggered off up the same route, pausing only while Sonia sprinted back down to collect the camera. It was an interesting sprint, downhill at quite a steep angle, over uneven rocky terrain, and she was wearing a full-length royal blue gown that didn't allow for much freedom of movement. It was less of a sprint, more of a fast-motion waddle. She complained when I pointed this out. At least I'm not mincing like you. I resent that, I said, pouting. Then I minced off to sulk. I'm sure that walking like a lady takes girls many years to master. Some, like my sister, never quite achieve it. So after half an hour's practice, I thought I was doing rather well. But the proof, as they say, would be in the pudding. or in this case, the videotape. We spent an enjoyable morning wandering around the canyon, stopping often to pose for ridiculous photos. Many other hikers passed us during these periods, old couples, young families, heavily bearded outdoorsmen. None of them said a thing. When we found ourselves underneath an overhanging ledge of rock, I couldn't resist indulging in a spot of climbing. "Your arse looks really massive now," Jill informed me, as I clung to the outcrop with all 4 limbs. "She's right," Sonia added. "It fills the viewfinder. This is going to be a real treat for the folks back home." "I'm splitting my sides," I called down through gritted teeth. "Us too." "No, literally. I mean my dress's sides are splitting. And at the back." There was a tearing sound as the zip struggled to contain my flexing shoulder muscles. "Get down quick," Rue said. "You'll spoil your dress." This turn of phrase also caused much hilarity amongst the girls. I dropped to the ground and reached around to feel the rip in the fabric. "Is it bad?" "It's left quite a hole," Rue confirmed. "I think it's safe to say this dress wasn't built for extreme sports." "Or else you needed a size 18, Jill said. "Look, you're bursting out like a skinny pink version of the Hulk." I said nothing after that, just to conform, to be normal. Sonia was filming everything in order to justify having hauled the video camera and tripod all the way up here, and Jill and Rue were taking photos of anything she missed. As I posed for the camera, I tried not to think how much fun my friends back home would have with the pictures were they ever to see them. It was the kind of thing that people do to each other as a joke, involving judicious use of Photoshop. I was doing it to myself because, well, it sounded like a good idea at the time. "Why do I have to do all the posing?" I asked Rue. She'd been caught on camera a few times, but in her rather flattering peach gown, she managed to carry it off quite convincingly, whereas my pictures looked decidedly seedy, no matter how much I worked my America's Next Top Model repertoire. It probably didn't help that I was sporting a few days' stubble, and I was sweating profusely in the 40-degree heat. No matter what I did, I looked increasingly like a psychotic redneck rapist wearing his mother's best church outfit. "But you're important," Rue explained to me. "You're the only one who actually is what they say in the movie, a cock in a frock on a rock." I had to admit this was true, if not entirely flattering. By the time we got back to Rusty, all 4 of us were dripping. The harsh Australian sun was unrelenting, and I'd managed to sunburn the outline of a truly impressive cleavage onto my chest. As the others started to peel off their sopping dresses, I reached into my voluptuous bosom and pulled out about half a mile of distinctly soggy toilet roll. "Anyone need to wipe their face?" I asked, offering the paper around. They all took it gratefully and started dabbing at themselves before it occurred to Jill to ask where I'd gotten it, as the van was still locked. "Between my titties," I admitted, which caused a round of gagging. "What's wrong? You chicks keep tissues in your bras all the time." "Not for other people to use," choked Sonia. Oh well then, give it us back if you don't want it. I've got a use for it." "Do we want to know?" "Probably not, but I'm going to tell you anyway. You're forgetting, I'm wearing underwear and shorts under here, for the sake of decency." I thrust a hand down my pants to prove it. "Whatever sweat you've got between your boobs, quadruple it, and that's what my balls are sitting in right now. I've got to reach in there and mop it all up, or I'll make a puddle on Rusty's seats." She handed back her paper streamer. "Please, for the love of God, go around the other side of the van to do it." "It's a deal," I told her, "as long as you don't try and film it."
You know, it might be time for us to resurrect that video.
Oh God.
Should I find it?
Oh no, it's
I think it's time for that to see the light of day.
That's not
I think
really
that's
necessary.
next weekend's
That's
job
not,
for me.
not really necessary.
Well, I think we need to see this video. Oh yeah.
Good God. Okay. Rock slide. Our next major stop contained the heart and soul of the trip. When we'd first conceived of driving Rusty up north, this had been the planned route back, for the sole reason that Ayers Rock or Uluru would be on our way. And now we were there. Well, we were approaching the ticket booth, praying that in spite of the crazy temperature, they'd let us climb it. As Rue pulled up, she pointed out a wicked van parked in the lay-by. We'd seen loads of wicked vans on our travels, their daubed cartoons and graffiti slogans ranging from mildly amusing to downright disgusting, but it had never occurred to us before that you might not actually get much choice when you hired one. Some vans we'd seen, again and again, each time prompting the question, who would ever want to drive around in a van that says massive cock on the side, even if there is a big picture of a chicken on the other side? Well, now we have an inkling of the answer. Because the van sitting opposite us was entirely hot pink and painted up as an exact replica of Barbie's camper. I know it was an exact replica because the girls told me. Yes, that's believable. Let's say it was that. Anyway, out of this glorious vehicle stepped a muscular bloke with a shaved head and tattoos covering both arms. He glanced around furtively, took several steps away from the van and lit a cigarette. I don't think I've ever seen someone look so tough and so embarrassed at the same time. The poor bloke was obviously waiting for someone in the ticket office, so he had a good chuckle at his expense, debating what kind of person would emerge to join him. A very wholesome young chap named Gerald, perhaps? Or a cowboy in leather trousers with the bum cut out? Or maybe a 10-year-old girl? Rusty rocked with our laughter until I noticed the bloke glaring at us in the wing mirror. Maybe we should get on with it, I suggested. Fine, said Jill, but you stay here or you'll end up staring at him. So I hid in the van while the girls went to buy our tickets. No one else emerged by the time they got back, and the bloke was back in his van, looking angry. Was there anyone else in the office? I asked. Is he dating Barbie herself? No, just a medium-sized English girl who looks about as pissed off as he does. No prize for guessing who got the last van in the lot then. I wonder if they had the choice between something really manly and like pornographic or the Barbie-mobile. Well, he's going to have to do some careful editing of his holiday pictures before he lets any of his mates see him. This sparked a thought. Hey, we should get a photo of him with the van, I told the girls. Jill and Rue traded horrified looks. I know you're a bit short on common sense, Jill said, but we've driven a long way to see Ayers Rock. It would be a real shame to get murdered when we're this close. I had to concede that point. But then I remembered that we had Barbie Girl by Aqua on Rusty's MP3 player. I'm not proud of that. In fact, let's just blame the girls again, shall we? But it allowed us to roll down the windows and blast out the opening bars as Rue put pedal to the metal. I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world. Life in plastic, it's fantastic. He's still staring at us, Rue reported, checking the mirrors. He's not happy. No shit, I said. He's probably reading the sign we put in the back window. It was Jill's handiwork, of course. It said, we'd rather push Rusty than hire a wicked van. We chuckled all the way to Ayers Rock. Ayers Rock was closed, of course. We sat in the car park, looking over a fence at a massive hunk of red rock. I was reading the brochure, and the picture it painted didn't seem fair. So, it's closed because it's too windy. It's a gigantic, sticky, uppy rock in the middle of a completely flat landscape. Of course it's bloody windy up there. Every day, I'd imagine. It's closed if it rains. Okay, so that's never going to happen. But it's also closed if it's too hot. Too hot? It's in the middle of a desert. It's one of the hottest places in the whole damn country. Probably in the world. Oh, and it's closed on certain spiritual holidays. And if it's cloudy. So it's pretty much just closed then. It'd be easier to list when they open the damn thing. The local Aborigines don't like people climbing it, said Rue, because it's sacred to them. That might be part of the reason why it's closed so much. Well then, they need a sign that says, Welcome to Ayers Rock, Australia's #1 tourist attraction. We're open for 3 days every September, if you're lucky, and sometimes again in April. No one said anything for a while as we sat contemplating the rock. It truly was a magnificent sight, even cast against the battleship grey sky. At least our photos will be a bit different, Rue said. Yeah, they'll all be taken from the car park. No, I mean, you always see pictures of it with perfect blue skies above. It's almost never like this. Great. We'll be the only people in the world with photos of Ayers Rock looking rubbish. Newspapers will be queuing up to buy them. We sat staring at the rock for a good few minutes. This is where our interesting mix of personality types came to bear. Sonia was very responsible. Rue, left to her own devices, probably would have been more responsible, but she was easily overridden by more dominant personalities. Jill was responsible when it suited her, which wasn't often, and had a strong compulsion to do crazy things. And I'm a complete idiot. So when I said, bollocks to it, let's climb it anyway, Jill said, okay. Rue said, and Sonia said, we'll wait down here actually. So I jumped over the fence and ran towards Uluru. Ancestor spirits be damned, I thought. They could bring forth their complaints if they felt they needed to. I was willing to listen to reason. I even gave them a few minutes, standing around at the bottom of the rock while the last group of tourists read the info board and moved on. Not a single angry spirit appeared in protest, so I figured that put me in the clear. And up I went. I was slipping and sliding because Ayers Rock is smooth, worn down by constant wind erosion and the passage of the few humans lucky enough to show up on the 3 days a year when it's actually open. And I was running because at any moment I expected some irate park ranger to yell at me to come down. I made it as far as the chain link fence used by regular climbers to haul themselves up to the summit, and I paused for breath while I considered my options. I was roughly halfway up Uluru. It wasn't as big as I expected. I was exhausted, but I really wanted to haul myself hand over hand up the support chain. It didn't seem worth risking the wrath of, I don't know, some multicoloured flying snake or something, just to climb halfway up Uluru. So I took a double handful of the rusted chain links And as I did, I just felt a spot of wetness hit the top of my head. It was almost like rain. Nah, couldn't be. It never rains at Ayers Rock. Maybe once or twice a year, in particularly rainy years, in winter. But it was December, midsummer, and one of the hottest days on record at 46 degrees. That's 126 degrees Fahrenheit. It couldn't possibly be rain. It bloody well was, though. There was a blinding flash of lightning and an ear-splitting rumble of thunder. Suddenly the heavens opened and more water than this part of Australia had seen in a decade poured from the sky. I was soaked to the skin in seconds, as was the rock. Time to go, I thought. But the rain had done more than make me cold and soggy. It had turned the rock to glass. My feet went from under me straight away. I landed on my arse and managed to scramble to some form of stability. I set off, scooting along on my bum, sliding more than walking, losing more and more control with each passing moment. Then came the time when gravity took over. 1 second, I was crabbing my way down the rock, using my balls as brakes. The next, I was sliding in free fall, bouncing off every little ridge and flailing frantically at the rain-slicked surface. It wasn't the first time in my life I wished I was an octopus, but it was very nearly the last. I don't know how I regained control. Perhaps those psychedelic ancestor spirits just wanted to teach me a lesson for being such a wise ass. Maybe the lack of skin on my palms had something to do with it. But my trusty Vans found purchase on a rougher surface, my buttocks clenched the rock, and I slowed to a stop on the very edge of Uluru. Laying flat out like a starfish, I caught my breath. Then, feeling the cold, slick surface through the tears in my shirt, I wriggled over to the boulders lining the edge of the climbing route and slowly climbed down them. I'd been seconds away from being launched off the end of that slide like it was, well, the end of a slide. That would really have taught me a lesson, or at least the hospital bill would have. Waiting for me at the bottom was a tour guide, and the windows of his bus were lined with faces eager to watch me get a bollocking. "You're a bloody idiot!" the guy bawled at me. He was quite perceptive, this bloke. "Do you know how slippery it is up there in the rain?" he demanded. Given that he'd just watched me slide all the way down, I was tempted to ask if he thought I had wheels in my jeans. But I settled for saying, "Yeah, it is a bit." "Do you know that's the most dangerous thing you could have done?" he asked. "Well, yes, I do now," I told him. "I could pick up the phone and have a ranger here in 10 minutes to slap you with a $2,000 fine." "You're right, I apologise. I've been very naughty. I promise that I will never again try to climb Ayers Rock in the rain." He seemed happy enough with that. And it was a promise I was content to keep, because the chances of it raining again on Uluru in my lifetime are fairly slim. The chance of me being there at that time is even slimmer. And even if that exact set of circumstances did come to pass, why on earth would I want to? Because, you know, I've been there, done that, got the holes in my t-shirt. Ah, dear. And I'll read this. This one about this is after we'd finished the first leg of our journey in Rusty, we were back in Perth, and it's coming up to Christmas. So I'll just read it. How are we doing for time, love?
Perfect. You got time for one more. Half past
One more.
two.
Oh, okay. Strange bedfellows. Jill and I were determined to find a hostel where at least some of the residents spoke English. The last place we'd stayed had been entirely Chinese students, and I didn't think there'd be much of a Christmas vibe there. Unfortunately, accommodation anywhere that time of year is booked up well in advance. After asking almost every hostel in town, we finally managed to score the last 2 beds in 2 different rooms at a grubby little place called the Planet Inn. It was a real dump. Skanky mismatched sofas that had blatantly been found on the side of the road, and grubby mildew-stained walls. I never got to see the room that Jill was sleeping in, mostly because she was so disgusted by it that she slept on the sofa. But the room my bed was in, well, it took me about half an hour just to find the bed. Everything was buried under a knee-deep layer of clothes. Hairdryers, curlers and straighteners were strewn around with reckless abandon. A fire safety officer would have had a heart attack before he even got through the door. Plates of harsh-finished food perched precariously on bags of shopping, phone chargers writhed like snakes through the miscellanea, and shoes were scattered as far as the eye could see. Which wasn't very far, because the 8-bunk room was less than 3 metres square. The furthest bunk had a sarong draped like a curtain hanging from beneath the top bed to provide some privacy for the one below. A neat trick, I thought, particularly now I was here. All the other occupants in the room were female. It wasn't until late that night that I discovered the need for the curtain. There wasn't one person staying in that bed. There were 2. And they were fairly vigorous about proving it. It wasn't until the second night, when I joined Jill on the sofa, that I made a startling connection. The couple had been shagging every hour for most of the night, popping out for a quick cigarette in between each bout. I was amazed at their stamina, and a bit jealous, to be quite honest. But Jill was less than sympathetic. "I've got one word for you," she said. "Payback." I guess I had that coming. But still, I said to her, "They must be getting sore by now. I mean, I'm fairly vigorous." "I know," Jill interjected. "But really, she could be just lying there and faking it, but he must be swallowing Viagra like they're M&Ms. "You sure it's always the same bloke?" Jill asked. And that's when the penny dropped. The girl in the bed next to me had mentioned she was entering a competition for strippers in a local nightclub, and I'd spent half the day trying to figure out an excuse to sneak off and check it out. Not that she was pretty or anything, but hello, strippers. And somehow, it simply hadn't occurred to me that there were seedier sides to living with a stripper. Her friend in the next bed was obviously going one better. She was a hooker, and she was using our dorm room as a brothel. "No wonder they're so enthusiastic," I said. "I guess you would be if you'd paid for the privilege." Jill snuggled down in a sleeping bag, stretching out her legs onto the arm of the sofa. "Maybe we should find another place to stay," she suggested. "What, and leave all this glamour? Shit, dude, it's like living in Vegas. Only without the drugs and guns," she joked. And in one of those eerie moments where someone, sometime in the distant future, has just walked over your grave, we both felt a sudden chill. "We'll move out tomorrow," I promised. After several days of begging for beds, we finally moved into the Underground, a massive 3-storey hostel with a courtyard swimming pool and a cinema room in the basement. It was every bagpacker's dream, right in the heart of Northbridge, Perth's clubbing district. With only 2 days until Christmas, Jill and I could hardly believe our luck. It was expensive, so we'd booked the cheapest and only beds available in a 10-bed dorm. This proved to be a real stroke of luck, as the room was huge, with one wall entirely made of glass doors which opened onto the pool area. We'd do well here. Not wanting to impinge on Rue's family Christmas at such a delicate time, Jill and I spent Christmas Day in the Underground hostel, getting horribly drunk on goon. Oh yes, that's how classy we were. Jill had a whole Christmas dinner planned, but we got as far as making pancakes in the morning, had a glass of wine with them, exchanged presents, and drank wine while we did so, and from there events just kind of spiralled. By dinner time, Jill was fast asleep in the cinema room, and I'd passed out on the dorm room floor, apparently in exactly the same position as Jesus on the cross, which caused our roommates to draw felt pen stigmata on me and dress me in robes made from soggy pool towels. And then they put lipstick on me and gave me a guitar because, well, I wasn't the only one who was hammered. Present-wise, we got all sorts of little parcels from England. Most of them contained chocolate, so most of them arrived in liquid state. Mum having not cottoned on to the twin facts that A, they sell chocolate in Australia, and B, it was 40 degrees in the shade. Not to mention, the cost of posting chocolate to Oz has to be at least 10 times the cost of the chocolate bars themselves. Jill managed to buy me a hilarious t-shirt, which I still have, possibly because I get very few chances to wear it. It had a pink dinosaur on it, with the slogan, "Lickalotopus." You know that awkward moment when you realise your sister knows you a little bit too well? No, just me then. But my standout present for the year, also from Jill, was a cuddly toy. There were a whole series of them to collect, all scaled-up replicas of dangerous microbes. She'd chosen to buy me the pox. It was a cute, pink, coiled-up snake-type thing, and it was adorable. It was weeks before the joke wore off. Every time anyone asked me what I'd got for Christmas, I told them, well, my sister gave me syphilis. In return, I gave her a cuddly toy of a space shuttle, which I'd named Uranus. And I spent the rest of the week saying things like, Jill, stop playing with Uranus, and please move Uranus, I can't see the TV. If anyone has any doubts about the sophistication of my sense of humour, feel free to refer them to this paragraph. Boxing Day was spent having a second Christmas visiting Rue and her family to exchange presents with them. It was a merry occasion, and I was careful not to tread on any toes, both metaphorically and literally, what with everyone wearing thongs. It was hard for the Northern Hemisphere mind to get used to being Christmas and the hottest summer on record at the same time. Even shorts and t-shirts felt like too many clothes, and the house was scorching inside and out. But at least I got to wear my Christmas hat to the beach. Before we left to rescue Rusty, I'd been saving up my backpacking wages to buy Rue the dress of her dreams, a pale purple silk cocktail dress from a boutique called Intangible. She'd lusted after it for weeks, and I'd made the difficult decision to invest $200 in it in the hope of making her happy. Luckily, most shops in Oz still do a thing called lay-by, where they let you pay for things in instalments, so I'd spread the cost over several weeks of working as a brickpaver. When she opened it, her face lit up, and I knew I'd done the right thing. She was surprised and delighted, and when she tried it on for me, she looked absolutely stunning. And as far as I know, that dress has never been worn since. We don't get invited to too many cocktail parties. For reasons, see the paragraph on humour above. Being back at Rue's family home allowed me to indulge in another of my favourite activities, No, not what you're thinking. From the wide deck attached to the back of the house, all kinds of crazy critters could be observed. It was still a thing of wonder to me that in this place, all the small birds we have in England, like robins and starlings, Australia has parrots instead. And Rue's garden was full of them. Little animals I had no names for skittered back and forth, taking advantage of the shade under the decking, or frolicking in the half-acre of native forest. Well, not all of them were frolicking. The bandicoots, in particular, seemed to be having a particularly tough time. Perhaps because of the soaring temperatures, they decided to take refuge in the pond, completely disregarding the fact that they can't swim. No wonder they're endangered. Rue had been making a list of her bandicoot sightings to report to the Department of Conservation, until sighting number 14 was stiff, smelly and floating. I had to help her write an email to them that evening. Dear Department of Conservation, please find enclosed a report on the bandicoot that was living under our veranda until 2 o'clock this morning when he decided to go for a swim. He is now living in a plastic carrier bag in my bin. I'm not sure what the official number of them left in the wild is, but please deduct 1 from the total. If you're looking to wipe out any more of the little critters, just send them this way. Your friends in conservation, Tony and Krista. 3 of the poor buggers committed suicide this way before Rue came up with the idea of leaving bowls of drinking water out for them all over the garden. This led to the creation of our first joint New Year's resolution. Drown fewer bandicoots. I figured just because an animal is stupid, it doesn't mean it should be allowed to die. Otherwise, I'd be in serious trouble. There you go. And
It's 22?
it's 22. What do you think? Shall I do one more, or is it...
You've got a short one?
What have I got? Okay, I'll do this one just because this is an event that just absolutely cracked me up at the time, and when I read it back, it brings it all back, and it cracked me up as well. A very small bit of explanation needs to be done. We were now working down south in Margaret River, a lovely place, picking grapes, and we were living in a campsite. We were living in tents, and Jill had her own tent by this point, and Jill was actually quite fond of a guy called Dave, who was also working with us in the vines, and he was a nice looking little lad, very friendly, English guy. English guy. And
she loved him.
yeah, she was
Smitten, you might say.
Yeah, and so there are a few other characters. Don't worry about them in this book, in this chapter. Sorry, one of whom is a lady called Lauren, an American lady who is also. Well, actually, I've just realised at the start I introduced her. Here we go. Good company. As people came and went with the tide, into the mix was thrown Lauren, a pretty American chick with a voice so voluble I thought she'd swallowed a loudhailer. Now, everyone has irritating habits, and living this close together tended to bring them to light fairly quickly. Lauren was one of those people who always had to have the last say about everything, and always had to go one better than anyone else in the conversation. We call that black catting, as in my cat's blacker than your cat. But Lauren was also touchy and argumentative, so if I dared mention black catting to her, she'd probably have denounced me for racism. Shane, a big brash Geordie with long dishevelled hair, was a more amiable companion. Every morning we'd struggle out of our tents, cursing the cold, cursing our lateness, and empty a bowl of cornflakes down our necks before leaping into Rusty with everyone else who needed a ride. Without fail, as we inhaled our breakfasts, Shane would be stood there at the barbecue frying up a huge pile of bacon. He was late for work every single day, but he didn't care. His bacon ritual was more important. Why don't you just scoff some cereal and save yourself some grief? I asked him once. Because, he slurred, I love pig in the morning. Seemed like a good enough reason for me. Every morning, the extra seats in Rusty filled up with the last workers to drag themselves out of their tents. One morning, Jill was incensed to see Lauren coming out of Dave's tent, obviously late because she'd spent the night getting more intimately acquainted with him. Jill's fondness for Dave was well known throughout the campsite, and to see that her arch enemy had moved in for the kill put Jill in an unspeakably foul mood. She sat in silence while she ate her breakfast, then climbed into the driving seat and gunned Rusty's engine so hard he roared. The van was already moving when Lauren piled in at the last possible second, slamming the door shut just behind her. Just as Jill gave vent to her frustrations. I'm gonna kill someone! Sorry, dude, I started. I'm gonna fucking kill someone! I fucking hate Americans! Jill, maybe you should... Bitch! Jill, maybe you should probably know... Fucking bitch! Steady on, I warned. But I had no chance to elaborate further, as Jill was far from done. fucking Americans! Why are they always so fucking loud, so irritating, and that bitch! There was absolutely nothing I could do. Apart from boot the back of the driver's seat. Maybe that would distract her. Ow! Stop fucking kicking me! I almost believed that had done the trick. But no, Jill wasn't letting go. When we get back, I'm going to take the fire axe and make fucking firewood out of that bitch! Jill, hey, chill out a bit. Ah! She pounded into the steering wheel in rage. Fucking hell! Fucking Americans! Every fibre of my being wanted to scream, shut up! Jill! Lauren is in the fucking car with us! But I couldn't. Not without making it even worse. Diversion was all I could try, though it was a fair bit late for that already. Hey, Jill, not all Americans are like that. No, just one particular loudmouth, fat, ugly, dumbass, devious little bitch! And then Lauren spoke up. Hey, that's pretty hurtful, to me, because I'm American and we're perfectly nice people. You've been travelling with someone for too long when you can read their, oh shit, body language, even though you're sitting behind them. Jill's head and neck went suddenly stiff, which can't have been healthy given the terrain we were bouncing over. But, her mental gears were spinning so frantically I could almost smell them burning. But, Lauren, you're not American, are you? I sure am. Lauren sounded a little indignant, but that was all. Oh, said Jill, I'm sorry. We all thought you were Canadian. And somehow, unbelievably, she'd pulled it off. Lauren chatted away quite contentedly for the rest of the journey, blissfully aware that she'd been savagely insulted for the first 5 minutes straight. It was a testimony not just to Jill's mental agility under pressure, which I have to say was brilliant, but also to the incredible density of the foam Lauren's brain was carved from. Jill's tirade may have been a little inappropriate, but she was bang on the money. Either Lauren was so self-centred that she couldn't believe anyone would purposefully want to insult her, or else she genuinely hadn't realised what was going on, which meant that, as well as being annoyingly loud, irritatingly whiny, exceptionally abrasive, and about as attractive as a poorly shaved pig in a tracksuit, Lauren was also considerably dumber than that pig. Probably dumber than the tracksuit too. Do you know what? I'll leave that one there. It's a little bit harsh, perhaps, but
Looking back.
Looking back. There's one. Have we got time for? Shall I read about George Push starting the Bobcat, or shall I not?
Yes, you have got time, but 10 minutes.
Okay. Just realised that half this book is just like me being really mean to a bunch of people who we met. But generally speaking, they had it coming. I will say that, I promise. But
you do make a lot of friends.
Yeah. Well. So skipping forward again a little bit here, we were doing gardening for a company called Global Gardens, and there was a guy called George who was a very, very helpful guy, a Bobcat driver. Also, a bit of an unusual character in that he liked to talk a lot. He could talk more than anybody we've ever known. But hey, he was great at his job, and we didn't mind at all being stopped at work to talk. Anyway, here we go. George gets pushy. It was around this time that Rusty developed a fault on his lights. It was called Jill leaving the damn things on all the time. It wasn't really her fault. No, sod that, it was her fault. Even though I denied it strenuously at the time to avoid making her feel bad. It bloody well was your fault, Jill. Because it was still dark when we left for the ridiculously long drive out to the job site, we needed our lights on. Dawn would overtake us on the road each morning, and by the time we arrived at work, we were bathed in full daylight. This made it hard to spot the lights being left on, and as we were always in a rush, and Rusty wasn't advanced enough to have any kind of alarm or signal, the lights, quite often, stayed on. The result being, when it was time for everyone else to go home, it wasn't for us, because we lived nearly 50 miles away, and our car was dead. The first time it happened, Rue was still working with us. As the building site was on a slight slope, we simply pointed Rusty's nose downhill, and Rue and I pushed him while Jill sat in to get him started. We were lucky enough on that occasion to have him belch a cloud of foul black smoke and shudder into life before we came to the perimeter wall, because that meant his brakes started working too. It's always useful when you're pushing a car downhill towards a rather large brick wall to know that it has brakes. We weren't always that lucky. Several weeks later, after a long, tiring day, we sagged into the car seats, worn out in body and spirit. Then Jill summoned up the energy to put the key in and turn it. Click, and nothing happened. Oh, crap. Jill reached up and flicked the headlights off, sadly about 10 hours too late. As usual, we were the last vehicle in the car park. Not that any of the other workers cared enough about us to help, even if they'd been there to ask. I sighed, climbed wearily from the van and assumed pushing position. Jill opened her door and took up her own stance, one hand on the wheel. We were so used to this, it barely required communication. Go, Jill said, and we both leant our bodyweight forward, pitting ourselves against Rusty's steel-framed inertia. With 3 warm bodies, this was difficult but doable. With just the 2 of us, uphill, it was borderline impossible. Inch by foot, we forced the ungainly vehicle out through the car park entrance and turned him so he faced down the slope. Jill climbed in and got ready. Ready! And off I pushed. Downhill, faster, and not faster. Slower, in fact. Thick mud sucked at Rusty's tyres, fighting me for momentum. I wheezed and panted, throwing all my effort into moving the van, but Rusty plodded on. Jill made a few useless attempts at starting him, a few clicks and a lurch, and then we were finished, facing the wall. We were struggling with the impossible task of pushing him back up the hill, backwards, when George the Bobcat driver wandered up. He came to help straight away, monologuing about his reasons for still being here, most of which boiled down to him spending so much time talking he hadn't finished his day's work yet. Unbelievably, we'd pushed Rusty almost halfway back up the hill before he thought to ask what the problem was. Flat battery, I told him, and explained the difficulties with push-starting him over muddy ground. I should have known that such a helpful chap would have a solution, and I could have guessed I wouldn't like it. No worries, George can sort it out. I'll give you a push with the Bobcat. Eh? How? I'll just use the bucket, eh? Jill and I exchanged glances. I could see she was thinking the same thing as me. Is this guy a fucking lunatic? But you know what? It didn't matter. We weren't getting home without him. It was an hour's drive, for God's sake. There was no way in hell we were walking. Okay, George, I said. We just sit inside then? Yeah, no worries. Bobcat will sort it out. Too easy. It was a tense few minutes as we waited for George to get back in his beloved Bobcat. Jill went over and over at the procedure for push-starting Rusty. It was something we'd done many, many times already, but never whilst being pushed by an earth-moving machine. We had no idea what George had planned, and I was hoping I'd be able to convince him to try something a little bit less extreme, like towing us back to the top of the hill and then lending a shoulder to help us push Rusty back down. Surely that was the wisest course of action. I resolved to tell George exactly this. We heard him coming long before we could see him. The Bobcat's engine roared loud and throaty as it skidded around the corner. George must have decided that taking a run-up was the best course of action, as he wasn't slowing at all as he approached us. Shit! Jill, he's going to ram us! I know! What do we do? Fuck knows! George was on the approach, barrelling towards us up the incline. I braced for impact, pressing so hard against Rusty's floor panel I was half afraid I'd put my feet through it. We both clung to the handbrake lever as though it offered some kind of magical protection against onrushing maniacs. The Bobcat bucket was lowering as it came. I'd seen bad guys dispatched this way at the end of action movies. But George, never subtle, was still a master of his tools. He dropped the throttle a fraction as he came into contact, and the tiny lull in speed, coupled with the uphill gradient, caused the bucket to clang hard into Rusty's front bumper without crushing right through it and decapitating its occupants. I was quite glad of that. That impressive forward momentum now transferred to Rusty, at least once Jill had unclenched her hand long enough to release the handbrake, and Rusty lurched into sudden, violent motion, backwards. It was a little unnerving, to say the least. The Bobcat steamed forward, shuffling Rusty along at breakneck speed. Jill, her eyes the size of dinner plates, was steering frantically with the gaze fixed on the rear-view mirror. Pop the clutch, I yelled at her. What? Just start the frigging car! Oh, right! Rusty lurched as Jill slammed him into reverse gear, and our speed definitely slowed, but nothing else happened. Jill's leg was going up and down, pumping like mad while she turned the key hard enough to break it. Nothing. We slowed to a crawl, then stopped, having reached the crest of the hill again. George was winking at me in a most unnerving way from above the digger bucket. He wore a grin that seemed to say, not bad, let's give her one more go. I shuddered at the thought, but Rusty was going nowhere. No worries, George will sort it, he said. What we'll do is swap out the batteries, put the Bobcat battery in this. That'll get her going. I collected my thoughts. I'd just won a 10-minute argument against repeating the process we'd been through, downhill, only faster. But now I was having serious doubts about the amount of molestation would convince Rusty to... No amount of molestation would convince Rusty to start. And this seemed like a particularly stupid way to die, even for me. The next plan, though, did it have merit? Not for the first time, and certainly not for the last. I wished I had any kind of mechanical knowledge at all. If we start it, won't it stop when we take the battery out? Jill asked. How do we swap the batteries back? Nah, she'll be right, said George. But George, how do we swap the batteries back? Just keep her running. Keep your foot down. Can you take the batteries out like that? Won't you get electrocuted? Nah, no worries. That seemed to settle it. We tipped the driver's chair forwards to access the engine bay. Realising at that point that to keep Rusty running at the same time as having access to the battery compartment, one of us would have to sit in the passenger seat and keep a foot on the accelerator from the opposite side of the van. Difficult, but not impossible. The whole scheme, though, that did seem impossible, just a bit. Especially when George beckoned us over to look at his battery. Bobcats are quite a mean piece of kit, so it was no surprise to find it was equipped with a battery the size of a bar fridge. "She's a beauty, eh?" he enthused. But one of those embarrassingly oversized beauties that didn't really fit in. "Thanks anyway, George." "No worries. Guess we'll have to jump start her after all, eh?" "But we don't have any leads. Or we'd have tried that first, remember?" "No problem. George can sort it out. There's brick ties everywhere. I'll just grab a couple of those and off we go." "Brick ties? You mean those bits of wire?" "Yeah, too easy. There's some." And he picked out of the dust a pair of steel wires, slightly thicker than coat hangers, and started to untwist them for added length. George, I don't think that'll work, mate." "No, George can sort it out. Bring the van closer so I can reach the Bobcat." And this is where we felt we had to pull the plug, before a friendly, somewhat eccentric bloke gave himself a lethal electric shock on our behalf. It just wasn't worth it. I let Jill talk George down this time, as the continued failure of his schemes seemed to be spurring him on to come up with ever crazier ones. We stumbled through the front door, exhausted, more than 2 hours later. Rue, bless her, had been worried sick. Telling her the story was almost as traumatic as living through it. Finally, George had agreed to call the RAC. He told us he was a platinum member and that they'd be obliged to fix our vehicle just because he was with us. That had sounded suspiciously like a load of bollocks, and had turned out to be just that. But George, in utterly inimitable style, had simply talked his way around it. He hadn't convinced the RAC man he was a platinum member, probably because the RAC man knew that platinum membership didn't exist. George's card was silver, and it had expired. He also hadn't convinced the bloke that Rusty was his van, that he'd bought him, in spite of the acid trip exterior, to ferry labourers to work. Not by a long shot. But he stuck to his story, and repeated it, and repeated it, and in the end he talked so much, and for so long, that he wore the guy down. After listening to George's bullshit for 3/4 of an hour straight, the poor RAC bloke decided discretion was the better part of valour, or something like that. He stuck his machine onto Rusty, superfied the battery, started him up, and then fled. Against all the odds, George had in fact sorted it out. And that was when we fled too. A few weeks later, we fled that job completely. We now had just enough time to complete the Bilberman track, if we really pushed it, and then get over east to meet Mum. Our boss owed us nearly a month's wages by this point, so I had to get tough. I called him and threatened to report his reliance on illegal labour to the Australian Taxation Office if he didn't cough up some dough. This had the desired effect. At our last meeting, he gave Jill and I $1,500 each. He promised to pay the rest of what he owed us by bank transfer the following week. He never did, of course, but we knew that would happen. To be honest, we were so glad to be rid of that job that even hiking 1,000 kilometres sounded like a relief. "I need to lie down," I said to Rue after making the phone call. "Don't worry, there'll be plenty of time to rest on the Bilberman track," she said. From this exchange, I got the impression that our concepts of rest are somewhat different. And there we go, I'll leave it at that one.
The weather's just gone wild out there.
Oh, it's getting a bit dodge, so happy days. That was a nice place to leave it. As I say, we're just about halfway through the book, so I've done 3 now, haven't I? Yep. So I'll do 2 more. I'll do one, a bit of the Bilberman track and some other stuff, and then I'll do a reading of just the bits from New Zealand, because Jill lives there now, so it's only fair. So thank you everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I hope you all had a nice week, and I hope you're going to have another fantastic week, and stay safe and everything. And I won't do too much waffle now because you've all heard way too much of my voice. So thank you very much, and we'll see you again next time.